The ballroom glowed with a polished kind of luxury that felt rehearsed rather than lived. Every chandelier sparkling as if competing to prove its worth. Every guest wrapped in confidence borrowed from wealth. The air carried the soft clink of crystal glasses and the hum of practiced laughter, the kind that rose quickly and vanished without leaving warmth behind. At the center of the room stood a grand piano, black and flawless, its lid closed like a secret no one bothered to open. Roman Volkov, the billionaire host of the evening, stood nearby, tall and effortless in his tailored suit, surrounded by admirers who mirrored his smile a second too late. He was used to being the loudest certainty in any room, used to attention bending toward him like iron filings to a magnet. Someone mentioned that the pianist scheduled for the night had not arrived yet, and Roman scoffed, swirling the champagne in his glass. "A piano doesn't make a miracle," he said, his voice carrying easily across the marble. "Anyone can press keys." Then, amused by his own boredom, he tapped the piano lightly and laughed. "Play the piano," he announced theatrically, "and I'll marry you." The words were meant as a joke, tossed into the air with no intention of landing anywhere meaningful. Laughter rippled through the guests, indulgent and sharp, and Roman smiled wider, satisfied. That was when a woman at the edge of the room began to move forward. She hadn't been noticed before, partly because she wasn't trying to be. Miriam Levin wore a simple dress, dark and modest, her hair pulled back neatly, her presence quiet but grounded. She walked slowly, not with hesitation, but with intention, as if each step was already decided long before the moment arrived. The laughter faded unevenly as heads turned. Roman noticed her then, his amusement sharpening into curiosity. "Are you volunteering?" he asked lightly, his tone half mocking, half intrigued. Miriam didn't answer him. She reached the piano, rested her fingers briefly on the smooth surface, and closed her eyes. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then her hands lowered to the keys. The first note was soft, almost fragile, but it carried through the room with an unexpected clarity. Conversations faltered. A second note followed, then another, forming a melody that felt less like entertainment and more like memory unfolding. Miriam played as if she were speaking a language older than the room itself, each note deliberate, weighted with meaning. The piano responded warmly, its sound filling the space not with volume, but with presence. The laughter disappeared completely. People stood still without realizing they had stopped moving. Roman's smile slowly slipped, replaced by a focus he rarely gave anything he couldn't control. The melody deepened, weaving sorrow and hope together so tightly they became indistinguishable. It spoke of loss without bitterness, of endurance without pride. Miriam's fingers moved with quiet confidence, never flashy, never rushed, as if the music had chosen her rather than the other way around. A woman near the wall felt tears rise unexpectedly. A man who had made millions that year felt something in his chest loosen painfully. Roman felt unsettled, though he didn't yet know why. This was not a performance meant to impress him. It ignored him entirely, and that frightened him more than applause ever could. The piano seemed to echo voices long gone, stories that had survived fire, silence, and exile. Miriam's face remained calm, her eyes closed, her posture steady, as if she were holding something sacred and fragile at the same time. When the melody finally slowed, when the last note lingered in the air like a held breath, no one clapped. The silence was too heavy, too full. Miriam lifted her hands gently, as though afraid to disturb what she had placed in the room. Only then did she open her eyes. She didn't look for approval. She didn't look at Roman at all. She simply stood there, the echo of the music still vibrating in her fingers. Applause came slowly, uncertain at first, then louder, driven less by politeness and more by something raw and unexplainable. Roman found himself unable to move. His joke echoed back at him, hollow and small. For the first time in his life, someone had stood in front of him, accepted his mockery, and answered not with anger or submission, but with truth. And in that moment, surrounded by wealth and witnesses, Roman Volkov realized that something inside him had shifted, though he didn't yet know how to name it. The days after the gala refused to settle back into their familiar rhythm, no matter how hard Roman Volkov tried to force them. His penthouse still overlooked the city like a throne above the world. His calendar remained packed with meetings that bent markets and reshaped fortunes. Yet something subtle had fractured his certainty. The melody Miriam Levin had played followed him everywhere, slipping into the silence between conversations and surfacing at the most inconvenient moments. During negotiations, he found himself distracted, fingers tapping unconsciously against polished tables, as if searching for keys that weren't there. At night, when the city lights blinked below him like obedient stars, the music returned again, softer now, but more persistent. Roman told himself it was curiosity, nothing more, the same curiosity that had driven him to understand every system he had conquered. He asked his assistant to look into her, expecting to find ambition hidden beneath humility, a strategy behind the restraint. Instead, the report unsettled him. Miriam Levin was not famous. She did not chase stages or sponsors. She taught piano and music theory at a modest community center, most of her students children from immigrant families who paid what they could, sometimes nothing at all. She lived simply, owned very little, and donated time more generously than money. Roman reread the file twice, annoyed by how little it offered him to measure or manipulate. Impulsively, he arranged a meeting, disguising it as a charitable discussion, convincing himself this was just another investment, another curiosity to satisfy. The restaurant he chose was elegant but subdued, the kind of place where power didn't need to announce itself. Miriam arrived on time, dressed plainly, her presence calm, almost disarming. Roman stood as she approached, surprised by the instinct. Conversation began easily enough, Roman filling the air with practiced charm, stories of global ventures and strategic risks, watching her reactions closely. She listened attentively but without awe, nodding politely, asking nothing about his wealth. When he paused, expecting admiration, she simply waited, as if silence didn't make her uncomfortable. Eventually, Roman steered the conversation toward the gala, smiling lightly. "You changed the mood of the entire room," he said. "People are still talking about it." Miriam's expression didn't shift. "Music changes people when they let it," she replied quietly. "I just played what needed to be played." The simplicity of her answer irritated him, though he wasn't sure why. He pressed further, asking where she learned to play like that, expecting tales of elite training or rare mentors. Miriam spoke instead of her grandmother, who had played in secret when music was forbidden, who believed melodies could preserve identity when words failed. Roman felt something tighten in his chest, a discomfort he masked with a sip of wine. He tried humor, half repeating his infamous joke. "So," he said, smiling, "do you get that offer often? Play the piano and I'll marry you." Miriam met his eyes directly for the first time. "Marriage isn't a prize," she said evenly. "And music isn't a trick." The words landed without cruelty, but they struck deeper than mockery ever could. Roman laughed reflexively, then stopped when he realized she wasn't smiling. An unfamiliar feeling crept in, embarrassment, raw and unguarded. Over the following weeks, Roman found reasons to cross paths with Miriam again. Invitations framed as support for the arts, donations offered without publicity. He attended her small recitals, sitting in folding chairs among parents and children who whispered and fidgeted, far from crystal chandeliers and champagne. No one recognized him, and for the first time that anonymity felt oddly freeing. He watched Miriam teach, her patience unwavering, her praise sincere, her discipline firm but kind. She treated each student as if their voice mattered, no matter how unpolished. Roman began to notice how differently time moved in those rooms, how success was measured not in applause but in understanding. One evening, after a recital held in a dimly lit hall, Roman approached her as she packed up sheet music. "Why don't you play bigger stages?" he asked. "You could." Miriam smiled faintly. "Not everything meaningful needs to be loud," she answered. The sentence followed him home, echoing against the glass walls of his penthouse. He began questioning habits he had never examined before, the casual dismissals, the jokes sharpened at others' expense, the way he had learned to dominate rooms rather than listen to them. His world, built on certainty and control, suddenly felt incomplete, as though he had mastered the mechanics of power but missed its purpose. Roman realized, slowly and unwillingly, that Miriam's gift was not merely her ability to play the piano. It was her refusal to let the world define her worth, and in standing so firmly in that truth, she had begun to expose the hollowness in his own. Time softened the sharp edges of Roman Volkov's life in ways he had never anticipated, not through dramatic sacrifice or public confession, but through a quiet reordering of what he paid attention to. The empire he had built still stood firm. His name still carried weight in rooms where decisions shaped economies, yet the gravity had shifted. He no longer felt satisfied winning arguments simply because he could. He listened more, spoke less, and noticed how often silence revealed more than dominance ever had. Miriam Levin remained a steady presence at the center of this transformation, though she never claimed credit for it. She continued her work at the community center, her days filled with imperfect scales, nervous recitals, and small breakthroughs that would never make headlines. Roman visited less frequently now, not because his interest had faded, but because he had learned not to intrude. When they did meet, their conversations were quieter, deeper, stripped of performance. One evening, Roman invited Miriam to his penthouse, not for a gathering, not for spectacle, but for dinner he insisted on cooking himself. The kitchen, usually untouched except by hired hands, smelled faintly of burned garlic and effort. Miriam arrived carrying a small notebook of sheet music as a gift, something simple and personal. They ate at a modest table near the window, the city stretching below them in restless light. Roman spoke without rehearsed confidence, admitting how lost he had felt after the gala, how her music had unsettled him in ways success never had. "I built everything to be untouchable," he confessed quietly. "And you reminded me that being untouched isn't the same as being whole." Miriam listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful rather than triumphant. After dinner, she stood and walked toward the grand piano that dominated the living room, its polished surface reflecting the city lights. Roman hesitated, unsure whether to speak, unsure whether he deserved to ask anything of her. Miriam sat without ceremony and placed her hands on the keys. "This is unfinished," she said softly. "Like most honest things." She began to play, not the powerful melody from the gala, but something gentler, exploratory, a piece that wandered and paused, allowing space for mistakes and breath. Roman listened differently this time, not as a man being challenged, but as one being invited. He heard uncertainty woven into hope, restraint paired with courage. When she finished, the room felt changed, warmer, less guarded. Miriam turned to him. "A gift," she said, "is not meant to prove worth. It's meant to reveal it." Roman nodded, his eyes burning, understanding finally settling into something lasting. He did not joke. He did not repeat his old words. Instead, he apologized, not dramatically, not publicly, but sincerely, for the ease with which he had once dismissed what he didn't understand. Miriam accepted the apology without ceremony, not because it impressed her, but because it was real. Their relationship unfolded slowly after that, not rushed by wealth or expectation. Roman supported her work openly now, but without ownership, allowing her independence to remain intact. He attended recitals not as a patron, but as a participant in something meaningful. The press speculated, stories twisted and exaggerated, but Miriam remained untouched by the noise. One evening, months later, Roman stood beside her at a small recital, listening as children played with trembling hands and proud smiles. He leaned toward her and spoke quietly, his voice steady, unadorned. "I once thought marriage was a prize," he said. "Now I know it's a promise." Miriam looked at him, really looked at him, and smiled, not because of what he offered, but because of who he had become. She did not answer with words. Instead, she squeezed his hand lightly, and in that gesture was everything unspoken. Respect, choice, equality. The billionaire who once laughed at a piano had learned to listen, and the woman who revealed her gift had done so not to be chosen, but to remain herself. And in that balance, something rare and enduring was born, not from mockery or power, but from humility, music, and the courage to change.